During my annual performance review, my boss slid a single piece of paper across the table and told me he was cutting my salary in half. He leaned back in his expensive leather chair, steeped his fingers, and said I could take it or leave it. I looked at the new contract, smiled calmly, and asked when the change would take effect. He smirked and told me it started immediately. I nodded and told him his timing was absolutely perfect. He had no idea that I had already been recruited by his biggest competitor and that his arrogant little power trip had just given me the legal loophole I needed to destroy his entire company. My name is Rachel. I am 33 years old, and for the past 8 years, I was the director of client acquisitions at Apex Communications in Chicago. Or at least I was until the people I trusted most decided I was too successful for my own good. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever had a toxic boss try to steal your worth and you made them pay the ultimate price. The glass-walled conference room on the 40th floor offered a sweeping view of the Chicago skyline. It was a beautiful view, and it was a view I had earned. When I joined Apex 8 years ago, we were a struggling mid-sized public relations firm operating out of a cramped office in the suburbs. I worked 80-hour weeks. I skipped holidays. I missed family events. I built our client roster from the ground up, pitching to major corporations until my voice went hoarse and my feet bled from standing in heels all day. I transformed this company into a powerhouse. Sitting across from me was Richard Harrison, the 55-year-old chief executive officer of Apex. He wore a custom-tailored suit that cost more than my first car and a smug expression that he wore like a second skin. Richard liked to call himself a visionary leader. In reality, he was a nepotistic credit thief who spent his afternoons at the country club while I did the actual work of keeping the business afloat. I sat upright in my chair holding a thick portfolio containing my annual performance metrics. I was fully expecting a substantial bonus and a clear path to becoming a named partner. I had the numbers to back it up. Richard, I said, keeping my tone professional but confident. As you can see from the quarterly reports, my division has exceeded all projected targets. I personally secured the renewal of our 3 largest enterprise accounts. My client acquisition strategy is currently responsible for exactly 70% of the total revenue coming into this firm. I think it is time we discuss my transition to a partnership role. Richard did not even glance at the portfolio I placed on the desk. Instead, he picked up a sleek silver pen and tapped it rhythmically against the mahogany wood. He let out a condescending chuckle that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Rachel, you have always been a hard worker. He began using that patronizing tone he reserved for female employees who dared to ask for what they deserved. But partnership is a big leap. We need leadership that sees the bigger picture, not just someone who is good at closing sales. I felt a flash of anger but kept my face perfectly neutral. Closing sales is what pays for this building, Richard. I brought in $15 million in new billing this year alone. You took the credit at the annual gala, but we both know whose signature is on those contracts. His smile tightened. He hated being reminded that his empire was built on my back. He opened a drawer, pulled out a single sheet of paper, and slid it across the smooth surface of the desk until it rested right in front of me. The board has been reviewing our operational budget, Richard said smoothly. We are restructuring the executive compensation packages to better align with our new corporate direction. This is your new employment agreement. I picked up the document. The paper felt heavy, loaded with disrespect and pure arrogance. My eyes scanned the dense legal jargon, skipping past the standard confidentiality clauses and company policies until I reached the bolded compensation section. I stopped reading. I blinked and read the line again, assuming there was a massive typographical error. The base salary listed was exactly 50% of my current pay. They were cutting my salary in half. The number glared up at me, a blatant insult printed in black ink. It meant I would be making less than the entry-level coordinators I had personally hired and trained last spring. It meant I would not be able to cover my mortgage and my living expenses without dipping into my carefully managed savings. I looked up at him, my heart hammering against my ribs, but I refused to let him see the shock registering in my eyes. "Is this a joke?" I asked evenly, though the blood was rushing in my ears. Richard leaned back in his chair, folding his arms behind his head with an air of complete supremacy. "No joke, Rachel. We are bringing in new talent, and we need to redistribute the financial budget across the department. You have peaked in your current role. We feel this new compensation accurately reflects your updated value to the company. You have a choice. Take it or leave it." The sheer audacity of his words echoed in the quiet room, bouncing off the expensive glass walls. Updated value. After 8 years of unwavering loyalty, after sacrificing my entire 20s to build his personal wealth, he was telling me I was only worth half of what I was making yesterday. He expected me to cry. I could see it in his smug, expectant eyes. He wanted me to beg, to plead for my livelihood, to list out my accomplishments, to remind him of my fierce loyalty, and to throw myself completely at his mercy. He wanted to break me down and put me firmly in my place so he could continue exploiting my hard work for pennies on the dollar. Instead of breaking, I felt a familiar armor sliding into place. I took a slow, deep breath, burying the immediate sting of betrayal deep down where his arrogant gaze could not reach it. A cold, calculating calm washed over my entire body, freezing out the panic. I did not shed a single tear. I did not raise my voice or offer any desperate pleas. I simply placed the paper back on the desk, smoothed out the edges with my fingertips, and smiled. "I understand," I said. My voice was steady, void of any emotion. "When does this new salary structure take effect?" Richard smirked, clearly satisfied that he had cowed his top earner into submission without a fight. "Immediately," he replied, "starting with your next paycheck." I nodded slowly, looking him dead in the eye with a terrifyingly polite smile. "Perfect timing," I said. Before Richard could respond to my remarkably calm reaction, the heavy glass door of the conference room swung open. In walked Brittany. She was Richard's 24-year-old niece, fresh out of a mediocre communications program and completely devoid of any actual professional experience. She strutted into the room carrying a designer handbag that cost more than a junior associate makes in a month, the scent of her overpowering floral perfume instantly filling the enclosed space. She dropped her oversized bag onto the polished mahogany table and gave me a brilliant, entirely hollow smile. She did not bother to apologize for interrupting a private performance review, because in her mind she already owned the place. Richard beamed at her like she was the crown jewel of his corporate empire. He gestured for her to take the empty leather chair beside him. "Rachel," Richard announced, his chest puffing out with unwarranted pride. "As part of our new corporate direction, I am thrilled to introduce your new co-director of client acquisitions. Brittany will be stepping into a leadership role alongside you to help modernize our approach." I stared at Brittany. I knew for a fact she had just failed 3 separate job interviews at rival public relations firms across the city. Her resume consisted of managing a minor sorority social media page and planning 2 parties. Now she was suddenly my equal, handed a senior director title purely because she shared the same last name as the man sitting across from me. I looked back at Richard, connecting the dots with the swift precision that made me so good at my job. "I see," I replied, my voice completely devoid of the outrage they were both waiting for. "So when you mentioned redistributing the financial budget, you meant you are taking half of my salary to pay your niece a 6-figure income she has not earned." Richard frowned, clearly irritated that I was stripping away his corporate jargon and exposing the raw, ugly truth of his nepotism. "We are investing in fresh perspectives," he corrected sharply. "Brittany brings a younger, more dynamic energy to the firm. We need someone who understands the modern digital landscape." Brittany leaned forward, resting her chin on her manicured hands. She looked at me with an expression of manufactured pity, her eyes gleaming with malicious satisfaction. "Thank you so much for stepping aside to make room for the next generation, Auntie Rachel," she chirped. The nickname was a deliberate, calculated insult, designed to make me feel old and obsolete. Do not worry. I am sure I can learn a few things from your old school methods while I take over the heavy lifting on the big accounts. I know you must be getting tired from working so hard all these years. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice to point out that I had brought in every single one of those big accounts she was so eager to take over. I simply held her gaze until she shifted uncomfortably in her seat, the silence stretching out until the door clicked open a second time. This time it was Amanda. She was 35 years old, my older biological sister, and the director of human resources for Apex Communications. Growing up, Amanda was always the golden child, the one who craved authority and thrived on putting me in my place. When I got her the interview for the HR position 5 years ago, I thought we could be a team. Instead, she had spent the last half-decade aligning herself perfectly with Richard, acting as his personal enforcer and treating me as a threat to her own corporate standing. Amanda walked in, carrying a sleek red folder. She wore a sharp charcoal suit and an expression of cold authority. She did not look at me with sisterly concern. There was no solidarity in her eyes, no shock at the blatant theft of my livelihood. She walked straight to Richard, handed him a pen, and then turned to face me. Rachel, Amanda said crisply, switching into her fully automated corporate voice. I have the updated employment addendums right here. We need your signature acknowledging the new compensation structure and the updated title designations. I looked at my own sister, searching for even a fraction of hesitation. Amanda, I said quietly. You process the payroll. You manage the performance reviews. You know exactly how much revenue I generate for this company. You know this pay cut is entirely unjustified. Amanda rolled her eyes, her professional mask slipping to reveal the resentful older sibling she truly was. Oh, please, Rachel, stop making this about you, she sighed, crossing her arms over her chest. Look at the bigger picture for once. You are 33 years old. You are single. You have no children. Your mortgage is practically paid off. What do you even need all that money for anyway? The sheer audacity of her statement hit me like a physical blow, but I kept my face frozen in a pleasant, unbothered expression. It is not about what I need, Amanda. It is about what I have earned through years of dedicated labor. Well, Brittany is getting married next year, Amanda countered, gesturing toward the smug 24-year-old sitting beside our boss. She is saving for a massive wedding. She needs the financial foundation right now to start her life. You are just hoarding wealth while living completely alone. Stop being so incredibly selfish. The company needs to spread its resources to support the people who are actually building real families. I listened to my sister weaponize my personal life against me to justify stealing my salary. She was actively gaslighting me, trying to make me feel guilty for expecting to be paid for the work I actually did. She wanted me to believe my worth was defined by my marital status. Because I did not have a husband, my financial security was entirely disposable. I stared at my sister, letting her ridiculous justification hang in the stale air of the conference room. She actually expected me to accept that my years of relentless dedication were worth less because I did not have a wedding registry to fund. Amanda stood tall, her shoulders squared, projecting the manufactured authority of a human resources director who believed she held all the cards. She slid the red folder across the polished mahogany table until it bumped against my folded hands. She opened it with a sharp flick of her wrist, revealing a dense stack of legal documents printed on heavy cardstock. Sign the addendum, Rachel, Amanda commanded, tapping her manicured index finger against the bottom of the first page. It is effective immediately. And before you even think about throwing a tantrum or marching out of here to find another job, I strongly suggest you review Section 4 very carefully. We updated the terms to protect the operational integrity of Apex Communications. I lowered my gaze to the document, specifically to the paragraph Amanda was pointing at with such aggressive satisfaction. It was a revised, non-compete agreement. The legal jargon was dense, but the message was crystal clear. It stated that upon termination of my employment, whether voluntary or involuntary, I was legally prohibited from working for any public relations agency, marketing firm, or corporate communications department within a 50-mile radius of the greater Chicago metropolitan area. The restriction period was set for a staggering 24 months. 2 full years of an absolute professional blacklist. Amanda leaned closer, her voice dropping into a harsh, threatening whisper that was meant to intimidate me into total submission. If you refuse to accept this new salary structure and decide to quit, you will not be able to work in your industry for 2 years. You cannot take your client list. You cannot reach out to your corporate contacts. You cannot even consult independently. We will bury you in litigation so fast your head will spin. You will be serving coffee at a local cafe while Brittany takes over your accounts. Just sign the paper and keep your remaining salary. It is more than fair for someone in your position. Richard leaned back in his chair, a triumphant grin spreading across his face. He looked like a man who had just successfully executed a flawless trap. He truly believed he had me cornered. He thought he had weaponized my own sister against me to deliver the final crushing blow. In his arrogant mind, I was completely paralyzed. I had a mortgage to pay. I had bills. I had a lifestyle that depended on my income. He assumed the threat of a 2-year professional exile would force me to swallow my pride, accept a 50% pay cut, and spend the rest of my career training his unqualified niece to eventually replace me completely. Brittany giggled from her seat, picking up her designer bag and placing it on her lap. Honestly, Auntie Rachel, you should look at this as a blessing, she chirped, flipping her blonde hair over her shoulder. With less money, you will have fewer responsibilities. You can finally take some time to relax. Maybe pick up a hobby. Knitting is supposed to be very therapeutic for older single women. They all waited for the inevitable breakdown. They waited for my voice to crack. They waited for the tears of frustration to well up in my eyes. They expected me to beg for my original salary, to plead with Richard to reconsider, or to appeal to Amanda's non-existent sense of familial loyalty. They wanted the satisfaction of watching the powerful independent director of client acquisitions crumble into a desperate, defeated employee. I did not give them a single drop of satisfaction. I did not cry. I did not beg. I did not even raise my voice to defend my professional dignity. Instead, I let a mask of pure, impenetrable ice fall over my features. I looked at the contract one more time, making absolutely certain that the wording regarding the 50% salary reduction was explicitly stated, and that the effective date was marked as immediate. It was all there, printed in black and white, signed by Richard Harrison himself. I reached across the table and picked up the sleek silver pen Richard had been tapping earlier. The metal felt cold and heavy in my hand. Without a single word of protest, I flipped to the signature page. I pressed the tip of the pen against the thick paper and signed my name in fluid, decisive strokes. I dated it. I initialed the specific clauses Amanda had highlighted. The scratching sound of the pen echoed loudly in the sudden, stunned silence of the conference room. When I was finished, I closed the red folder and pushed it smoothly across the mahogany table toward my sister. Amanda stared at the closed folder, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and suspicious triumph. She had braced herself for a massive argument. She had prepared a dozen different corporate threats to counter my resistance. My quiet compliance completely derailed her script. Richard sat forward, his smug grin returning with full force as he pulled the folder toward himself and flipped it open to verify my signature. "Excellent decision, Rachel," Richard said, letting out a loud, boastful laugh. "I knew you would see reason. You have always been a practical woman. This is the start of a fantastic new chapter for Apex Communications. Brittany and I are looking forward to seeing you transition your primary accounts over to her by the end of the week." I stood up, slowly smoothing the non-existent wrinkles from my tailored blazer. I looked at Richard, bathing in his unearned victory at Brittany, glowing with unmerited entitlement, and finally at Amanda, my own flesh and blood, who had just enthusiastically participated in what she believed was my professional execution. They were absolutely convinced they had trapped their biggest asset for half the price. They thought they had secured millions in revenue while legally binding my hands behind my back. "I will begin the transition process immediately," I said, my voice as calm and cold as a frozen lake. I turned on my heel and walked toward the glass door. I did not look back as I exited the conference room, my posture perfectly straight, my face a mask of absolute ice. Let them gloat. Let them celebrate their clever little contract and their strict non-compete clause. They were so blinded by their own greed and arrogance that they failed to realize they had not trapped me at all. By forcing me to sign that document under those specific conditions, they had just handed me the exact weapon I needed to tear their entire empire down to the ground. The underground parking garage of the Apex building was practically empty by 7 o'clock that evening. I sat in the driver's seat of my sedan with the engine turned off, watching the shadows stretch across the concrete pillars. The faint hum of city traffic echoed from the street level above. I checked my watch. Right on time, a tall figure emerged from the stairwell. Jamal was 36, a brilliant employment lawyer, and my sister Amanda's husband. While Amanda had assimilated into the toxic culture of our family and Richard's corporate empire, Jamal remained a grounded outsider. As an African-American man who fought for every ounce of his success in the legal field, he had zero tolerance for unearned privilege, nepotism, and corporate exploitation. Since Amanda introduced him to the family 5 years ago, we shared an unspoken mutual respect. We were the only two people in that social circle who understood the value of hard work. Jamal approached my car, glanced around the deserted garage to ensure no one was watching, and pulled open the passenger door. He slid into the seat, the smell of crisp winter air and expensive cologne filling the quiet cabin. "Did you sign it?" Jamal asked, his voice a low, steady rumble. "Every single page," I replied. "I even initialed the non-compete clause, exactly where Amanda told me to." "You should have seen them, Jamal." Richard looked like he had just won the lottery, and Amanda was glowing with pure satisfaction. "They really think they have me trapped in a corner. They think I am going to sit quietly and train Brittany to take my job while making entry-level wages." Jamal let out a deep, resonant laugh that echoed in the small space of the car. He pulled a thick folder from his briefcase and handed it across the center console. It was not a standard legal file. Stamped boldly across the front cover was the sleek silver logo of Vanguard Media, the absolute largest public relations competitor in the Midwest, and Richard Harrison's ultimate corporate rival. "Let them gloat," Jamal said, a sharp, calculating smile spreading across his face. "Because Richard and your sister just committed corporate suicide, and they were too arrogant to even consult outside legal counsel before pulling the trigger." I opened the folder. Inside was an incredibly lucrative employment contract drafted exclusively for me. It outlined a massive signing bonus, a base salary double what I was making at Apex before the cut, and the official title of Vice President of Client Acquisitions. I ran my fingers over the crisp paper, feeling a rush of pure adrenaline. "Are you absolutely certain this holds up in court?" I asked, needing to hear him confirm the strategy we had been quietly building for the past 3 weeks. Jamal leaned forward. "I am a partner at a top employment law firm, Rachel. I do not deal in uncertainties. What Richard did today is a textbook case of constructive dismissal. Under modern labor laws, an employer cannot unilaterally enforce a hostile change to your working conditions to force you out. Slashing your salary by 50% without cause, mutual agreement, or a shift in responsibilities is the legal equivalent of firing you without cause." He tapped the Vanguard folder resting on my lap. "By breaching the core terms of your original employment agreement, Richard invalidated the entire contract. That includes the non-compete clause. A company cannot legally slash your wages in half, constructively terminate your position, and then claim you are bound by restrictive covenants. When Richard forced you to sign that contract, he handed you the key to your own cage. The non-compete is entirely unenforceable." I let out a slow breath, the heavy weight of the past 8 years finally beginning to lift off my shoulders. I looked at Jamal, my secret ally in the shadows. "Why are you helping me do this?" I asked quietly. "Amanda is your wife. When this all blows up, Richard is going to demand answers, and she is going to be caught right in the blast radius." "Amanda made her choices," Jamal said firmly. "I love my wife, but she has become consumed by Richard's toxic environment. She uses her human resources position to bully employees, including you. I have tried to pull her back to reality, but she is addicted to the power Richard feeds her. She needs a harsh wake-up call. He gestured toward the apex building towering above us. Richard represents everything I despise. He steals wages, exploits workers, and hands high-level positions to unqualified relatives. He needs to be dismantled, and you are the only person who holds enough power to actually do it. Vanguard Media is ready for you, Rachel. David Pierce is expecting you to officially accept the offer by the end of the week. I closed the Vanguard folder, gripping it tightly in my hands. The plan was flawless. Richard and Amanda thought they were playing a brilliant game of corporate chess, completely unaware that I had already flipped the board. They wanted me to act my wage. They wanted me to accept 50% of my value. I was going to give them exactly what they asked for, but I was also going to take the empire I had built and hand it directly to their worst enemy. "Thank you, Jamal," I said, my voice ringing with absolute certainty. He simply nodded, opening the passenger door. "Do not thank me yet," he replied, stepping out into the cold garage. "The fun part has not even started. Give Brittany the exact level of training she deserves. Let Richard feel the consequences of his actions. I will have the lawsuit for wage theft and constructive dismissal drafted and ready to file the moment you give the signal." I watched Jamal walk away, his steady footsteps echoing loudly in the silence of the garage. The very first domino had just been pushed. The following Sunday, I drove to my parents' house for our mandatory family dinner. This weekly ritual was just about establishing the current hierarchy of affection, and tonight the throne was firmly occupied by my sister. I stepped into the formal dining room and took my usual seat near the end of the table. Amanda was already holding court. She wore a smug expression, nursing her Cabernet while our mother hung on to her every word. Our father carved the roast with a proud grin, directed at his eldest daughter. At the opposite end sat Jamal, quietly cutting chicken into bite-sized squares for his 4-year-old son Leo. Jamal did not engage in the grandiose storytelling. He remained an observer, a silent anchor of sanity. Amanda took a slow sip of her wine before dropping her big news. "Richard officially finalized my executive bonus this Friday," she announced loudly. "It is the largest single payout Human Resources has authorized at Apex Communications." My mother gasped, placing a hand over her heart. "Oh, Amanda, that is wonderful. We always knew your strategic mind would take you to the top." My father pointed his carving knife toward her in absolute approval. "Hard work pays off," he declared. "What did you do to secure such a win, sweetheart?" Amanda shot a venomous glance in my direction before answering. "I optimized the departmental payroll," she said, leaning heavily on the corporate jargon to disguise the fact that she had just actively participated in robbing her own sister. "I identified areas where we were severely overpaying plateaued talent. By trimming financial fat and reallocating funds to fresh hires, I saved the company millions. Richard was so thrilled with my restructuring that he rewarded me with a percentage." She was bragging about stealing my salary, soaking up our parents' absolute adoration, entirely funded by the 50% pay cut she forced me to sign 48 hours earlier. I picked up my fork and took a slow bite of asparagus. The food tasted like ash, but I chewed slowly, refusing to give her the reaction she craved. I did not glare at her. I did not throw my napkin on the table or storm out of the house. I swallowed my food and offered a polite, empty smile. My mother, noticing my lack of enthusiastic applause, decided it was the perfect moment to shift the spotlight onto my perceived failures. "Rachel, you should really be taking notes from your sister," my mother said, her tone dripping with manufactured concern. "You have been a director at Apex for 8 years now. Do you not worry that you have completely stalled in your career? Amanda is continuously securing massive bonuses and rising through the executive ranks while you just seem so stuck." My father chimed in to support his favorite child. "Your mother is right, Rachel. You are 33. You do not have a husband to fall back on. You cannot afford to just coast by on your past achievements. In the corporate world, if you are not moving forward, you are moving backward. You need to show more initiative before they decide to replace you with someone younger and hungrier. The sheer blinding irony of his statement was almost too much to bear. They were sitting there lecturing me about initiative, entirely oblivious to the fact that I was the sole engine keeping Apex Communications profitable. They were praising Amanda for her brilliant financial strategy, completely unaware that her shiny new bonus was built entirely on the destruction of my livelihood. Amanda leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table, adopting a tone of patronizing mentorship. Honestly, Rachel, if you want some advice, you need to learn how to adapt. The industry is changing. You cannot just rely on your old client relationships forever. You have to prove your value every single day. If you ever want me to review your resume or give you some pointers on how to negotiate a better position for yourself, just let me know. My door is always open. I looked at my sister, marveling at her capacity for absolute deception. She had just handed half my income to a 24-year-old girl whose only qualification was sharing Richard's DNA, and now she was offering me career advice. Across the table, Jamal paused his movements. He wiped Leo's mouth with a napkin, then slowly lifted his gaze to meet mine. The dining room was loud with my parents' continued fawning over Amanda, but in that brief second, the noise entirely faded away. Jamal's dark eyes locked onto mine, sharp and intensely knowing. He did not say a single word, but the message was undeniably clear. He was watching them dig their own graves. He knew every single detail of the constructive dismissal trap they had blindly stumbled into. He knew about the Vanguard media contract sitting safely in my possession. We shared a silent, profound understanding that this toxic dinner was the last time they would ever be able to speak to me this way. I broke eye contact with Jamal and turned my attention back to my sister. I kept my posture relaxed, letting a terrifyingly serene smile spread across my face. "Thank you, Amanda," I said, my voice smooth. "I appreciate your valuable feedback. You are absolutely right. The industry is changing rapidly, and I need to start focusing on my true value. In fact, I am already taking steps to restructure my career path." My mother clapped her hands together, thoroughly pleased that I was finally accepting my place as the inferior daughter. "See, that is exactly the spirit I wanted to see, Rachel. Listen to your sister. She knows exactly how to handle the corporate world." I took a slow sip of my ice water. "Oh, I am listening to her right now, Mom," I replied calmly. "I am learning exactly how the corporate world operates." They went back to their meal, unaware that the countdown clock had started. They had absolutely no idea that I was already standing at the exit door and I was about to set the entire building ablaze. The next evening, I sat in a dimly lit private dining room at the back of an exclusive steakhouse in downtown Chicago. The atmosphere was a sharp contrast to the suffocating environment of my parents' dining room the night before. Here, the air smelled of aged leather and expensive bourbon. I took a sip of sparkling water, waiting patiently for the man who was about to help me execute the final phase of my exit strategy. At precisely 7 o'clock, the heavy oak door opened. David Pierce walked in. At 45 years old, the chief executive officer of Vanguard Media was everything Richard Harrison pretended to be. David was sharp, meticulously organized, and possessed a ruthless business acumen that had transformed Vanguard into the most formidable public relations firm in the Midwest. He did not rely on nepotism or stolen credit. He built his empire by identifying top-tier talent and paying them exactly what they were worth. David took the seat across from me, unbuttoning his tailored suit jacket. He ordered a Scotch neat from the waiter, who briefly appeared, then turned his full, undivided attention to me. "Rachel," he began, his voice commanding yet respectful. "Jamal informed me that you finalized the paperwork with Richard. I understand your current employer made a rather dramatic miscalculation regarding your compensation structure." I set my glass down. "Richard decided my salary was better spent funding a newly invented position for his 24-year-old niece," I replied smoothly. "He believes a 50% reduction in my pay is a fair trade for my continued loyalty." David let out a low whistle, shaking his head. The arrogance of that man is staggering. He just handed his best strategist over to his biggest competitor on a silver platter. Jamal already sent over the preliminary draft of your employment contract with Vanguard, VP of Client Acquisitions. Double your original Apex salary. Full benefits. I appreciate the offer, David, I said, leaning forward slightly. But before I officially sign on the dotted line, we need to discuss the welcome gift I am bringing with me to Vanguard Media. David raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. I am listening. I folded my hands on the table, maintaining absolute eye contact. I want to talk about TechNexus. At the mention of the name, the atmosphere in the room shifted. TechNexus was a massive technology conglomerate seeking a new public relations agency to handle their national rebranding. The account was worth a staggering $10 million annually. Landing TechNexus would solidify any agency as the undisputed king of the Chicago market. It was the white whale every firm was desperately trying to harpoon. David took a slow sip of his scotch. TechNexus is the biggest fish in the water right now, he acknowledged. My intelligence tells me Richard has been boasting at the country club that Apex is on the verge of securing their signature. He claims it is a done deal. I let out a soft, humorless laugh. Richard thinks it is a done deal because he sees the meetings blocked out on my calendar. What Richard does not know is the actual nature of those meetings. I paused for a fraction of a second to let the suspense build before dropping the absolute truth. Richard has never spoken to the CEO of TechNexus. Brittany does not even know the name of their lead procurement officer. For the past 3 months, I have been the sole point of contact. I cultivated the relationship. I handled the initial strategy sessions. I am the only reason Apex is even in the running for that $10 million contract. David set his glass down, his eyes locking onto mine with intense focus. Are you telling me that if you walk away from Apex, the TechNexus deal falls through for Richard? I am telling you that the CEO of TechNexus does not do business with agencies, I corrected him sharply. He does business with people he trusts. He trusts me. He specifically requested that I personally oversee his account. When I informed him this morning that I would be transitioning to a new firm due to irreconcilable differences with current management, he did not hesitate. He told me he follows the talent. I reached into my designer tote bag and pulled out a sleek black folder. I slid it across the table toward David. This is the finalized $10 million exclusivity contract for TechNexus. I stated, my voice ringing with icy confidence. The terms are fully negotiated. The deliverables are outlined. The only thing missing is the name of the agency printed at the top of the document. If you confirm my position as Vice President of Client Acquisitions right now, Vanguard Media gets its name on that dotted line. I am handing you the biggest account in the city and simultaneously ripping the rug right out from under Richard Harrison. David opened the folder, his eyes scanning the incredibly lucrative terms I had personally negotiated. He read the clauses, verifying the absolute reality of the leverage I was offering him. He was looking at a financial victory that would effectively secure Vanguard's dominance for the next decade. He closed the folder, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. He looked at me not just as an employee, but as a true corporate equal. You are absolutely terrifying, Rachel. I prefer the term properly motivated, I replied without missing a beat. Richard wanted me to act my wage. I am simply restructuring my professional portfolio to reflect my true market value. David reached into his breast pocket and produced a heavy fountain pen. He pulled the Vanguard employment contract from his own briefcase and placed it on the table next to the TechNexus documents. Welcome to Vanguard Media. Madam Vice President David said, his voice brimming with absolute satisfaction. We value our executives here. Nobody will ever touch your compensation, and nobody will ever take credit for your kills. I took the pen. The weight of it felt entirely different from the cheap silver pen Richard had forced upon me. This was not a tool of submission. This was an instrument of absolute power. I signed the Vanguard contract with swift, decisive strokes, securing my future and cementing the destruction of my past. We shook hands across the table, sealing a pact that would soon send shockwaves through the entire industry. I was no longer a disposable asset. I was a formidable force, fully prepared to reclaim my professional dignity and show them exactly what happens when you underestimate me. The trap was now fully armed, meticulously calculated, and heavily baited. All I had to do was walk back into the Apex office tomorrow morning, play the role of the defeated, underpaid employee, and wait for Richard and Brittany to step right onto the landmine they had built for themselves. The morning sun glared through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Apex Communications office as I stepped off the elevator. I carried my coffee, kept my head slightly lowered, and arranged my features into the exact expression Richard and Amanda expected to see. I looked like a woman who had been thoroughly defeated. I walked past the reception desk and settled into my office, deliberately leaving the door wide open so the sharks could circle. It did not take long. Barely 10 minutes after I booted up my computer, high heels clicked aggressively against the hardwood floor of the hallway. Brittany marched into my office without knocking. She wore a bright pink blazer that screamed entry-level enthusiasm and held an empty tablet against her chest like a shield. She stood in front of my desk, looking down at me with an expression of unearned authority. "Good morning, Auntie Rachel," Brittany said, emphasizing the familial title to remind me of her untouchable status. "Uncle Richard said you were ready to begin the transition process. I am going to need your complete VIP client database. The raw data, the contact numbers, and all of your personal notes. I want to start reaching out to the major accounts before lunch so I can introduce myself as the new face of the department." I let out a soft, compliant sigh, staring at my keyboard as if I lacked the energy to fight back. "Of course, Brittany. I have been compiling the transition files since I signed the new contract. I want to make sure you have everything you need to succeed in your new role as co-director." Brittany smirked, clearly thrilled by my absolute submission. She pulled up a chair, not bothering to ask for permission, and crossed her legs. "Perfect. I knew you would not make this difficult. Honestly, it is time these clients got a fresh perspective anyway. I plan on streamlining the communication process. Your old methods of taking them to long lunches and remembering their birthdays are a bit outdated. We need to be aggressive. We need to be digital." I nodded, slowly opening my bottom desk drawer. I reached inside and pulled out a sleek silver external hard drive. I placed it on the desk and slid it across the smooth surface toward her. "This contains the entire client relationship management export," I explained, keeping my voice utterly devoid of sarcasm. "It has the direct cell phone numbers, the executive emails, and the comprehensive dossiers I have built over the past 8 years. It includes the personal details that dictate how we interact with each executive." Brittany snatched the hard drive off the desk with greedy fingers. She did not ask a single question about the strategy. She did not ask for context on any ongoing negotiations. She just wanted the keys to the kingdom without understanding how to unlock the doors. What Brittany did not know was that I had spent the entire weekend carefully curating the contents of that specific hard drive. I gave her the correct phone numbers and the correct email addresses because giving her fake contact information would be too obvious. Richard would immediately accuse me of sabotage and try to fire me with cause. Instead, I weaponized the invisible currency of the public relations industry. I altered the soft details. In the high-stakes world of corporate communications, you do not keep a $10 million client by sending them a generic email. You keep them by knowing that their spouse prefers white orchids over red roses. You keep them by knowing their exact golf handicap. You keep them by remembering if their teenage child is applying to Stanford or Yale. Those tiny, intimate details are the glue that holds massive corporate contracts together. And I had meticulously poisoned every single drop of that glue. In the spreadsheet currently resting in Brittany's manicured hands, I had executed a flawless digital sabotage. I swapped the names of the client's spouses. For instance, the CEO of our largest manufacturing account was a man named Gregory who was going through a highly publicized, incredibly bitter divorce from his wife, Susan. In Brittany's file, I highlighted Susan as his current beloved partner and suggested asking about her recent vacation. I scrambled their dietary restrictions with surgical precision. I changed a severe peanut allergy to a gluten sensitivity. I listed a strict vegan executive as a massive fan of local steakhouses. I altered their hobbies, turning a die-hard Chicago Bears season ticket holder into a passionate fan of the Green Bay Packers. I shifted their corporate milestones, their hometowns, and the names of their beloved pets. It was a masterclass in subtle destruction. To anyone glancing at the file, it looked like a highly organized, deeply detailed goldmine of client information. To anyone who actually used it, it was a social hand grenade waiting to detonate. Brittany plugged the hard drive into her tablet and watched the files load. Her eyes scanned the dense spreadsheets, lighting up with arrogant satisfaction. "This is exactly what I need," she declared, completely failing to verify a single piece of information. "I am going to draft a mass introduction email right now, and then I am going to call the top 5 accounts directly. I will show them that Apex is moving in a younger, more aggressive direction." I folded my hands on my desk, maintaining my perfectly compliant posture. "That sounds like a very bold strategy, Brittany. I am sure they will be incredibly surprised by your outreach." "Oh, they will love it," she boasted, standing up and brushing off her pink blazer. "Uncle Richard wants me to take the lead on client retention. You can just focus on the administrative paperwork for now. I will let you know if I need you to clarify anything, but honestly, this database is pretty self-explanatory. I have got it from here." I watched her march out of my office, clutching the hard drive like a trophy. She was so blinded by her own ego and her uncle's protective shadow that she did not even pause to question why I was handing over 8 years of meticulous labor without a single argument. She assumed my spirit was broken because my salary was slashed. She thought power was simply handed down through a job title. I turned back to my computer screen, a genuine smile finally breaking through my carefully constructed mask of defeat. I opened a blank document and began drafting the aggressive, highly personalized pitch for Vanguard Media. I had my real client database secured on a private encrypted cloud server. I knew every spouse, every allergy, and every golf handicap by heart. Meanwhile, Brittany was currently walking back to her shiny new office, fully preparing to call the most powerful corporate executives in the Midwest, to ask them about their ex-wives and offer them peanut brittle. The fuse was officially lit, and I was sitting safely behind blast-proof glass, ready to watch the entire Apex client roster explode into absolute chaos. The fallout began exactly 47 minutes after Brittany marched out of my office. I knew the exact timing because I was keeping a close eye on the clock on my computer monitor while simultaneously drafting the opening statements for my Vanguard Media presentation. Through the thin glass walls of my office, I had a perfect view of Brittany settling into her executive suite. She had left her door wide open, eager to broadcast her newly acquired power to the rest of the floor. I watched her prop her phone between her shoulder and her ear, clicking her bright pink fingernails against the desk as she dialed the first number on the poisoned spreadsheet. She honestly believed that public relations was nothing more than acting perky on a phone call. She had no idea that she was walking blindly into a heavily fortified minefield. The first explosion happened quickly. I could not hear the person on the other end of the line, but Brittany's artificially sweet voice carried perfectly across the hallway. I heard her warmly introduce herself as the new co-director of client acquisitions. Then, exactly as I had orchestrated, she cheerfully asked Gregory, the CEO of our largest manufacturing client, how his lovely wife Susan was enjoying her recent vacation to the Bahamas. Gregory and Susan were currently entangled in one of the most vicious divorce proceedings in the entire state of Illinois. Susan had notoriously emptied their joint accounts and fled to that exact vacation spot with Gregory's former business partner. Brittany's smile vanished instantly. She stammered frantically, apologizing to dial tones. Gregory had slammed the phone down. Less than 20 minutes later, the second landmine detonated. Brittany had taken the initiative to order a corporate gift basket for the head of a massive logistics firm. She proudly ordered a premium assortment of artisanal jerkies and rare cuts from a famous local steakhouse. The executive was a strict, highly vocal vegan who sat on the board of several animal rights organizations. He called the main reception desk, bypassing Brittany entirely, screaming about how Apex Communications was actively mocking his personal ethics. By the time the third call went south, a massive argument regarding a premium set of Green Bay Packers tickets being offered to a die-hard Chicago Bears fanatic, the entire executive floor was buzzing with panicked whispers. In less than 2 hours, Brittany had alienated 3 of our highest-paying enterprise accounts. Heavy, furious footsteps pounded down the hallway, drowning out the office murmurs. Richard stormed into my office. He did not bother to knock. He slammed the door shut behind him so hard, the glass panes rattled. His face was a deep, mottled shade of crimson, and a vein pulsed visibly at his temple. He looked like a man who was watching his empire burn and could not find a bucket of water. Rachel, Richard barked, slamming his hands onto my desk and leaning over me. What the hell is going on out there? Gregory just called my private cell phone, threatening to pull a $3 million retainer because Brittany asked about his cheating wife. The logistics account is threatening a public boycott over a meat basket. What did you give her? I kept my hands resting gently on my keyboard and looked at him. I gave her the exact database she requested, Richard. The comprehensive client files, the contact numbers, and my personal notes. She insisted she was ready to take the lead on client retention. I simply followed your directive to hand over the transition materials. She is the new co-director after all. Richard gritted his teeth, his breathing ragged. I do not care about her title. She is inexperienced and she messed up the delivery. You need to fix this. Get on the phone with Gregory immediately. Tell him it was a clerical error by an intern. Send an apology basket to logistics. Smooth this over before they terminate their contracts. You are still responsible for keeping these clients happy. I did not reach for my desk phone. I did not pull up my email client to begin drafting apologies. I slowly pushed my chair back from the desk, crossed my legs, and looked at the furious CEO with absolute chilling indifference. I am not making those calls, Richard, I stated calmly. His eyes widened in genuine disbelief. Excuse me, I am giving you a direct order to salvage these accounts. This is your job. I leaned back in my chair, holding his furious gaze without fear. No, Richard, it was my job. Yesterday, you sat in a conference room and explicitly told me that I had peaked in my role. You handed me a revised contract and told me that my updated value to this company was exactly half of what it used to be. You restructured my compensation. I paused, letting the silence emphasize my next words. I am receiving 50% of my salary, Richard. Therefore, I am currently providing 50% of my usual output. I have already completed my administrative duties for the morning. Cleaning up disasters caused by a wildly unqualified co-director who failed to verify her own data is above my current pay grade. Richard straightened up, his face twisting with rage. He pointed a trembling finger. You are bordering on gross insubordination, Rachel. I can have Amanda in here right now to write you up. You are deliberately refusing to perform your duties. I am acting my wage, I corrected. You wanted to pay for an entry-level employee, so you're getting an entry-level effort. If Brittany wants a 6-figure salary and a senior title, she needs to learn how to manage her own client crisis. I suggest she starts by calling Gregory back and apologizing for her lack of basic research. Richard stared at me, paralyzed by his own trap. He could not fire me for cause because I had handed over the files exactly as requested. He could not force me to fix it because he had just legally stripped away my senior responsibilities and slashed my pay. He was realizing the devastating consequences of underpaying his most valuable asset. Fix your own mess, Richard, I added softly. He let out a growl. He spun on his heel, yanked the glass door open, and stormed out of my office. I watched him march down the hallway toward Brittany's suite where the panic was beginning. I turned back to my computer, cracked my knuckles, and returned to writing the Vanguard Media proposal with a smile. The rest of Tuesday passed in chaos. From my desk, I watched the floor turn into a frantic beehive. Brittany spent hours locked in her office trying to unoffend a vegan executive. Richard paced the halls attempting to salvage relationships Brittany had effortlessly tanked. I stayed in my lane organizing spreadsheets and drafting my Vanguard Media strategy. I was perfectly content letting Apex Communications burn. Then the ultimate bomb dropped. An urgent email pinged on my screen. It was an internal forward, but the original sender was the Chief Executive Officer of TechNexus. The message was brief and terrifying. TechNexus was accelerating their timeline. They wanted the final presentation delivered in person this Friday at 10 in the morning. We had less than 72 hours to produce a 50-page data-driven strategy for a $10 million account. Panic instantly gripped the office. A $10 million contract was a fundamental necessity for survival. Without TechNexus, Richard could not sustain the bloated executive salaries he had just implemented, particularly the massive bonus he handed Amanda. My desk phone rang. It was Richard ordering me into the main boardroom immediately. When I walked in, the atmosphere was suffocatingly tense. Richard was sweating through his dress shirt. Brittany sat clutching her tablet. Her smug arrogance was entirely gone, replaced by the wide-eyed terror of someone swimming in deep water without a life jacket. "Sit down," Richard commanded, pacing the room. "We have a crisis. TechNexus moved up the deadline. We present on Friday. This account is the absolute future of this agency, and we cannot afford a single mistake." I took a seat at the table. "That sounds like a fantastic opportunity for our new co-director to prove her value," I said, keeping my tone perfectly mild. "Brittany, I am sure your fresh perspective will absolutely dazzle them." Brittany looked like she was about to be sick. "Uncle Richard," she stammered, her voice trembling. "I have not even reviewed the file yet. I cannot write a 50-page strategy by Thursday night." Richard slammed his hand on the table. "You are not writing it," he snapped at his niece, acknowledging her complete incompetence. He turned his desperate, furious gaze toward me. "Rachel is writing it." "Me, Richard. I am just an administrative asset now. You cut my pay in half because I had plateaued. Writing a 50-page enterprise strategy is senior director-level work. That falls under Brittany's new compensation package." Richard practically snarled. "Cut the attitude, Rachel. If we do not land TechNexus, this firm loses its primary growth vector. You know this client better than anyone. You know exactly what they want to see in a rebranding rollout. You are going to drop every other task and write this pitch. It needs to be flawless. It needs to be the best work you have ever produced." I looked at him, letting the silence stretch. I wanted him to feel the absolute necessity of my presence. I wanted him to explicitly acknowledge that he still entirely depended on my brain to keep his lights on. "And what happens if I say no?" I asked quietly. "What happens if I decide to continue acting my wage?" Richard leaned over the table, getting right in my face. "Then I will have Amanda terminate you with cause for insubordination," he threatened, his voice a low rumble. "You will lose your remaining salary and your health insurance. And then I will enforce your non-compete agreement. You will not work in Chicago for 2 years. Do not test me. Write the pitch." I maintained my icy composure. He was throwing around empty threats, entirely unaware that his non-compete was already legally void. But I needed to play the part of the cornered employee. I needed him to believe he had won. "Fine," I said, letting a hint of fake resignation slip into my voice. "I will write the pitch. I will build the slide deck, crunch the data, and formulate the entire strategy. I will have it perfectly formatted and ready." "What time do you need me in the boardroom on Friday to present?" Richard stood up straight, adjusting his tie as a cruel, triumphant smile spread across his face. He had gotten exactly what he wanted, and now he was eager to deliver the final insult. "You are not attending the pitch meeting, Rachel," he stated, his tone dripping with absolute disrespect. "Excuse me, you heard me," he said, gesturing toward his terrified niece. "Brittany needs the exposure. She is the new face of this department. The TechNexus executives need to see that we are bringing in young, dynamic leadership. If they see you presenting, they will think we are relying on tired tactics." He leaned back, savoring the moment. "You are going to write every single word of this presentation. You are going to script it, format it, and hand it over. But on Friday morning, you will stay in your office. Brittany will stand at the front. You write it, she presents it. Do we have an understanding?" The sheer audacity was breathtaking. He was demanding that I surrender my masterpiece so his unqualified niece could take the credit and seal a $10 million victory under her own name. It was ultimate theft. I looked at Brittany, who was slowly regaining her smug posture now that she realized I was going to do all the heavy lifting. Then I looked at Richard, bathing in his own perceived brilliance. "We have a perfect understanding, Richard," I replied softly. "I will make sure the presentation is exactly what you deserve." I stood up and walked out of the boardroom. My heart was not heavy with defeat. It was racing with pure anticipation. Richard thought he was punishing me by keeping me out of that boardroom on Friday. He had no idea I was already scheduled to be there, just not on his side of the table. I locked myself in my office the moment I walked out of that boardroom. I pulled the blinds shut, silenced my desk phone, and initiated a communications blackout with the rest of the floor. For the next 72 hours, my world shrank to the glowing rectangle of my computer monitor, the hum of the ventilation system, and a steady flow of black coffee. Richard thought he had forced me into a corner, making me an invisible workhorse for his niece. He had no idea he had just given me 72 hours of unsupervised time to meticulously craft his absolute downfall. I was not just writing one 50-page pitch. I was writing two completely different presentations simultaneously. The first document was for Apex Communications. I called it The Decoy. I poured my professional discipline into making it exactly what Richard demanded. It was highly competent. It was formatted flawlessly, utilizing the official company color palette and standard corporate jargon. It checked every box on the TechNexus request for proposal, but it was entirely devoid of a soul. I stripped out the innovative edge. I removed the aggressive, forward-thinking strategies that I knew the TechNexus chief executive secretly craved. Instead, I gave Apex a presentation filled with safe, middle-of-the-road public relations tactics. It was the kind of presentation that would earn a polite nod and a firm rejection. It was perfectly fine, and perfectly fine is the fastest way to lose a $10 million account. Occasionally, Brittany would knock on my door, breaking my intense concentration. She would pop her head in holding a green smoothie and ask how her pitch was coming along. She wanted bullet points she could memorize. I handed her a stack of index cards filled with generic buzzwords: synergy, paradigm shift, holistic alignment. She took them eagerly, practicing her lines in the hallway with all the depth of a high school cheerleader running for student council. She did not ask a single question about the analytics. She did not inquire about the crisis management protocols. She just wanted to know which slides she should click past quickly and which ones required her to smile at the clients. I gave her exactly what she asked for. I gave her a script she could read without needing to understand a single word. I was handing her a loaded gun and telling her it was a prop. While Brittany practiced her shallow lines, I turned my attention to my secondary monitor. This was where the real work was happening. This was the Vanguard media pitch. If the Apex presentation was a dull butter knife, the Vanguard presentation was a surgical scalpel. I poured every ounce of my industry knowledge, my creativity, and my insider understanding of TechNexus into this document. I knew the TechNexus chief executive was tired of traditional marketing. He hated corporate jargon. He wanted a public relations firm that would act like a ruthless attack dog, aggressively repositioning his company in the modern digital market. I built a comprehensive multi-phase strategy that delivered exactly that. I designed custom analytics dashboards. I mapped out a hostile takeover of their competitors' media space. I tailored every sentence to speak directly to the specific anxieties and ambitions I had uncovered during my private 3-month negotiation with their leadership team. This presentation was electric. It was dangerous. It was undeniably brilliant. And it had the bold silver Vanguard Media logo stamped on every single page. The physical toll of staying awake for 3 straight days began to set in by Thursday evening. My eyes burned, feeling like they were coated in fine grit. My hands trembled slightly as they hovered over the keyboard. My back ached from sitting in the same rigid posture. I was surviving on sheer willpower and the potent, intoxicating adrenaline of impending justice. Every time my focus started to slip, I just thought about Amanda defending my pay cut. I thought about Richard handing my title to a girl who barely knew how to use email. That anger burned away the exhaustion. Richard walked past my office several times, peering through the slight crack in the blinds. He saw a broken woman working herself to the bone to save his company. He saw a subdued, obedient employee producing a massive document that he was about to steal. He thought he was playing a brilliant game of checkers, jumping his pieces across the board to claim my king. He did not realize we were not even playing the same game. I was playing 3-dimensional chess. I was moving knights and bishops into positions he could not even perceive, setting up a checkmate that would obliterate his entire side of the board in a single move. He was too blind to see the trap closing around him. By 2 in the morning on Friday, the office was dead silent. The cleaning staff had come and gone. I sat alone in the glow of my monitors. I reviewed the Apex decoy presentation one final time. It was perfectly mediocre. I saved it to a flash drive, printed a crisp copy, and placed it in a glossy white binder. It was ready for Brittany to butcher. Then I turned to the Vanguard pitch. I read the 50 pages of aggressive, flawless strategy. It was a masterpiece. It was a $10 million check waiting to be cashed. I encrypted the file, sent a secure copy directly to David Pierce, and printed a second highly confidential copy that I slipped into my personal leather briefcase. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling as the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky outside my window. The exhaustion was heavy, pulling at my bones, but my mind was razor sharp. I had done it. I had built the weapon that would save my career, and the anchor that would sink Richard Harrison to the bottom of the ocean. At 8 o'clock, the office began to hum with nervous energy. I was already sitting at my desk, dressed in a sharp charcoal suit that acted as my armor for the day. My leather briefcase holding the printed Vanguard Media proposal was tucked safely beneath my chair. The white binder containing the decoy Apex pitch sat innocently on top of my desk. I was nursing my 4th cup of coffee when my desk phone rang, breaking the heavy silence of my office. It was the Human Resources Department. My sister Amanda summoned me to her office immediately. She did not ask if I had time. She demanded my presence, her tone clipped and completely void of any familial warmth. I picked up the white binder, smoothed my jacket, and walked to the Human Resources suite. Amanda sat behind a massive glass desk that she had specifically requisitioned to intimidate lower-level employees. She wore a tailored crimson dress that practically screamed corporate dominance. When I walked in, she did not look up from her monitor. She deliberately kept me waiting for a full minute, playing a pathetic power game designed to make me feel small. I stood there patiently, feeling no anxiety. I was simply observing a woman who had traded her own blood for a hollow corporate title. Finally, she closed her laptop and folded her hands on the desk. She looked at me with eyes that held nothing but cold calculation. She pointed to the chair across from her, but I remained standing. I placed the white binder on her desk. "That is the complete TechNexus pitch," I told her calmly. 50 pages of strategy, perfectly formatted, ready for Brittany to present. Amanda did not even glance at the binder. Instead, she opened a drawer and pulled out a thick red file. I immediately recognized it as my personal employment record. She opened it to the very first page and rested her hand flat against the paper. "Richard is extremely anxious about this meeting today," she began, her voice dripping with artificial authority. TechNexus is the financial lifeline this agency desperately needs right now. We are sending Brittany into that boardroom to show them our new dynamic direction. But let me be perfectly clear with you, Rachel. If this pitch fails, if TechNexus walks away today, the blame will not fall on Brittany. It will fall entirely on you. I stared at her, marveling at the twisted logic she was employing to protect Richard's unqualified niece at my expense. I wrote the pitch exactly as requested, I replied mildly. What she does with it inside the boardroom is out of my control. She is the new co-director. She wanted the spotlight. She has to carry the weight of the presentation. Amanda stood up, her crimson dress catching the harsh fluorescent light of her office. She leaned over the desk, her face inches from mine. "It is completely in your control," she hissed, dropping the professional facade. "If Brittany stumbles, it means you sabotaged her preparation. If they reject the strategy, it means you deliberately wrote a weak proposal to make her look bad. And if that happens, Rachel, I will personally ensure you are immediately fired with cause. Do you understand what that means for your career? Firing you with cause for gross negligence will permanently destroy your professional reputation. Good luck explaining that to any future hiring manager who calls me for a reference. I will make sure your resume is radioactive across the entire Midwest." She reached into the red folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was the updated employment addendum I had signed earlier in the week. She picked it up and waved it aggressively in my face, making sure I could see my signature at the bottom of the page. "And do not forget about this little document," Amanda sneered, her voice echoing with malicious triumph. "You signed a strict non-compete agreement. If I fire you with cause today, you are legally barred from working in the public relations industry anywhere in the greater Chicago area for 2 full years. We will tie you up in so much litigation that you will not even be able to afford a decent lawyer to defend yourself. You will be completely locked out of the corporate world. You will be a barista pouring coffee for minimum wage before the end of the month if you dare to step out of line today. Your entire future is resting on Brittany landing this contract. Do not test me." She stood there, breathing heavily, clutching the voided contract like it was a loaded weapon. She fully expected me to cower. She expected me to beg her for mercy, to promise her that the pitch was flawless, and to grovel at her feet to protect my career. She was so intoxicated by her own perceived power that she completely failed to notice how relaxed I was. I was not looking at a terrifying human resources director. I was looking at a foolish woman holding a useless piece of paper. I let a slow, genuine smile spread across my face. I looked at the non-compete agreement she was waving around, then looked directly into her angry eyes. The contrast between her frantic desperation and my absolute serenity must have been jarring. I did not raise my voice. I did not try to defend my work or argue against her completely baseless threats. "Thank you for the feedback, Amanda," I said, my voice smooth and perfectly polite. "I always appreciate your unique perspective on my career trajectory. I am sure today is going to be incredibly memorable for everyone involved." I turned around slowly, adjusted the strap of my leather bag over my shoulder, and walked out of her office without saying another single word. I left her standing entirely alone in the suffocating silence, desperately clutching a completely void and utterly worthless fake corporate contract. I left my sister in her glass box and walked straight down the executive corridor toward Richard Harrison's corner suite. I carried the glossy white binder in my right hand and a plain white envelope in my left. I reached Richard's heavy oak door and let myself in without waiting for his assistant to announce me. Richard was pacing behind his desk, barking orders into his headset. When he saw me holding the binder, he abruptly ended his call and waved me forward. His eyes were wide with a mix of anxiety and greedy anticipation. I placed the white binder squarely in the center of his desk. He lunged for it, scanning the executive summary. He checked the data analytics section and the crisis management protocols. The tension melted out of his shoulders, replaced instantly by his signature brand of smug arrogance. It was a flawless piece of corporate literature, perfectly tailored to make Apex Communications look like a highly competent choice. He closed the binder and let out a deep, satisfied sigh. I knew you would not let me down, Rachel, he said, smoothing his silk tie. This is exactly what Brittany needs to close the deal today. I did not acknowledge his degrading compliment. Instead, I stepped closer to the desk and placed the plain white envelope right on top of the binder. Richard looked down at it, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. What is this? He asked, picking it up and inspecting the blank exterior. An invoice for overtime. I kept my posture perfectly straight and my voice absolutely level. That is my official 2-week notice of resignation, I replied. As outlined in my employment contract, I am providing 14 days of transition time before my final departure from Apex Communications. Richard stared at me for a long moment. Then he threw his head back and laughed. It was a loud, booming sound that echoed off the walls of his spacious office. He thought it was an emotional tantrum from a defeated employee trying to claw back a tiny shred of dignity. He tossed the envelope back onto the desk and pressed a button on his intercom. Bring Amanda in here right now, he ordered. He looked back at me, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. You really think you have leverage here, Rachel? You think throwing a piece of paper on my desk is going to make me panic and restore your salary? The office door swung open, and Amanda hurried inside, clearly expecting a crisis with the TechNexus presentation. Instead, she found Richard chuckling behind his desk and me standing quietly in front of it. Look at what your sister just handed me, Richard said, pointing to the white envelope. She is trying to quit. Amanda let out a loud, sharp, derisive snort. She walked over, picked up the envelope, and shook her head in exaggerated disappointment. I literally just warned you about this, Rachel. I just told you what would happen if you tried to throw a tantrum. Are you really this foolish? Richard leaned against the edge of his desk, folding his arms. Let us review the harsh reality of your situation. If you resign, you forfeit your health benefits immediately. But most importantly, you activate the non-compete clause you eagerly signed just a few days ago. Amanda stepped closer to me, waving the envelope like a penalty flag. If you walk out that door, you cannot work in public relations, marketing, or corporate communications anywhere within a 50-mile radius of the greater Chicago area for 2 solid years. We will flag your name to every major agency in the city. You will not even get an entry-level desk job. Good luck finding a job outside of Chicago. Richard mocked, his eyes gleaming with malicious delight. Maybe you can move to some small town in Iowa and write press releases for a local tractor company. Or maybe you can take a job pouring coffee right here in the city. I hear the tips are fantastic. They stood shoulder to shoulder, a united front of corporate bullying and familial betrayal. They wanted to see the panic set in. They wanted me to snatch the envelope back and beg to keep my half-salary position. I looked at my sister, whose face was twisted in a nasty sneer, and then at the man who had exploited my talent for nearly a decade. I did not blink or break eye contact. My resignation is effective precisely 14 days from today, I stated clearly, letting every word ring with absolute finality. I will spend the next 2 weeks fulfilling my basic administrative duties and organizing my digital files. I will not be taking on any new assignments or answering phone calls outside of standard operating hours. You have my pitch. Hand it to your niece. The rest is entirely up to you. I walked out of the executive suite, leaving their mocking laughter behind me. I walked straight back to my office and began the process of packing my personal belongings. I grabbed a cardboard box from the supply closet and started loading my framed degrees and my reference books. The rest of the floor watched me through the glass walls, whispering furiously as they realized the top earner in the company was actively clearing out her space. Brittany walked past, clutching the white binder to her chest, looking confused by the sight of my cardboard box. I offered no explanations to the gossiping crowd. I packed my desk methodically, completely unfazed by the storm brewing around me. Richard and Amanda believed they held the ultimate trump card. They believed the law was on their side. They had no idea that my brother-in-law had drafted the massive lawsuit, rendering their corporate threats useless. I checked my watch, zipped my leather briefcase containing the real Vanguard media presentation, and smiled. Friday was going to be an exceptionally beautiful day. My impending departure did not truly register with the executive team until that following Monday morning. I arrived at Apex Communications at exactly 9 o'clock. Not 8:50. Exactly 9 o'clock. For 8 years, I had been the first car in the parking garage and the last one to leave. I had sacrificed my evenings and my personal peace for a company that viewed me as an exploitable resource. That version of me no longer existed. I walked into my office, sat down at my mostly bare desk, and began sorting through the remaining digital administrative files. Outside my glass walls, the atmosphere was rapidly deteriorating into full-blown panic. Brittany's earlier attempts to assert her dominance using my poison database were finally bearing their destructive fruit. A disastrous phone call might be ignored as a fluke, but when that initial insult is followed by utterly tone-deaf emails, executives stop making allowances. The major accounts were not just irritated anymore, they were actively pulling the plug. By Tuesday afternoon, the legal department received 3 formal requests for contract reviews from our highest-paying clients. Gregory, the manufacturing chief executive whose bitter divorce Brittany cheerfully brought up, officially paused his retainer. The logistics firm, furious about the meat basket sent to their vegan team, sent an email explicitly stating they were actively seeking new representation. A third client requested an immediate audit because Brittany repeatedly mispronounced their flagship product during a conference call. Apex Communications was bleeding millions of dollars, and the newly appointed co-director was completely paralyzed. Brittany spent her days hiding in her office with the blinds drawn, refusing to answer her ringing phone. The reality of senior-level client management had completely crushed her arrogant facade. Richard was hemorrhaging clients, and his desperate attempts to stop the bleeding were ineffective. Realizing his niece could not save the sinking ship, he turned his frantic attention back to me. On Wednesday morning, an email landed in my inbox. The subject line read, "Resignation rejected." I opened the message and actually laughed out loud at the screen. Richard had typed a frantic, disjointed paragraph stating that my 2-week notice was officially denied due to a breach of professional duty. He demanded that I immediately resume full control of all client retention initiatives, cancel my departure, and work mandatory overtime to salvage the damaged accounts. He attempted to use his CEO title to override the basic legal concept of at-will employment. He honestly believed he could just refuse to let me quit. I did not reply to the email. I simply forwarded it to my personal account, flagged it as excellent evidence for Jamal, and went back to organizing my folders. 10 minutes later, Richard stormed down the hallway and stopped in front of my desk, his face flushed and breathing heavy. "Rachel, did you read my email?" he demanded, his voice echoing in the quiet corridor. "We are in a state of absolute emergency. You need to get on the phone with Gregory right now. I am rejecting your resignation. You are staying here until these contracts are secured." I looked up from my monitor, my expression completely serene. "I am sorry, Richard, but slavery was abolished long ago," I replied smoothly. "You cannot reject a resignation. It is a notification, not a request. Furthermore, as we established last week, my current compensation only covers administrative transitions. Client retention is the responsibility of your new co-director. I suggest you knock on Brittany's door." Richard slammed his fist against the doorframe. "You are deliberately destroying this company," he yelled, completely losing his professional composure. "I am simply fulfilling the terms of the 50% salary reduction you forced upon me," I countered, keeping my voice perfectly level. "You assigned me a lower value, and I am delivering exactly what you paid for." He spun around and stormed away, shouting for Amanda. But human resources could not help him now. No corporate policy could force an underpaid employee to perform miracles. The panic escalated. By Thursday, Richard and Amanda were desperately trying to reach me after hours. My phone lit up at 7, 8, and 10 o'clock at night. In the past, I would have answered on the first ring. Now I simply silenced the device, poured a glass of red wine, and enjoyed the quiet comfort of my apartment. They left frantic voicemails demanding I log online to fix emergency presentation slides and salvage angry email chains. I deleted every single message without listening to the end. My contract clearly stated my hours were 9 to 5. Anything beyond that was a courtesy I was no longer willing to extend. On Friday, my final official day of the 2-week transition period, the tension reached a boiling point. At 4:55 in the afternoon, Richard rushed into my office. His tie was crooked, and he looked like a man on the verge of a cardiac event. "Rachel, please," he pleaded, dropping the aggressive demands and resorting to pure desperation. "You cannot leave today. TechNexus is coming in next week for the big pitch. We need you to prep Brittany. We need you to guide her through the data. Just stay one more week." I looked down at the digital clock on my computer screen. It clicked to exactly 5 o'clock. I closed my laptop, stood up, and grabbed my coat. I slung the leather bag over my shoulder and looked Richard directly in the eyes. "My transition period has officially concluded, Richard," I stated, my voice ringing with cold, absolute finality. "The TechNexus pitch is finished and sitting on your desk. Brittany has everything she needs." I stepped around him and walked down the hallway for the very last time. I did not look back at the frantic CEO, the hiding niece, or the panicked sister. I walked into the elevator, pressed the lobby button, and smiled as the doors slid shut on Apex Communications forever. The following Friday morning arrived with a crisp electric chill in the Chicago air. This was the highly anticipated day of the TechNexus pitch. While I was standing in front of my bedroom mirror, carefully buttoning a sleek, tailored navy blue power suit that radiated absolute authority, the atmosphere over at Apex Communications was entirely different. I did not need to be inside their building to know exactly what was happening on the top floor. I knew Richard Harrison's transparent playbook by heart. I knew that at this very moment, he was transforming the main executive boardroom into a desperate, glittering spectacle of corporate theater. He was trying to buy the loyalty of a $10 million client with smoke mirrors and incredibly expensive catering. My phone buzzed on the bathroom vanity. It was a text message from a junior coordinator I had previously mentored, a sharp young woman who was still trapped in the Apex trenches, but remained entirely loyal to me. Her detailed message confirmed everything I had already envisioned. She texted that Richard had hired a premium, high-end catering company to set up a massive, extravagant breakfast buffet right inside the meeting space. The expansive mahogany boardroom table was completely covered with imported French pastries, fresh exotic fruit spreads, and silver artisanal coffee carafes. He was treating the most critical pitch of his entire career like a luxury hotel reception instead of a serious, data-driven business negotiation. Richard and his incredibly unqualified niece Brittany were already pacing the polished floor, practically salivating over the impending $10 million contract. They were both wearing brand new, flashy designer suits, treating the morning like a victorious celebration before the race had even officially started. Brittany was apparently standing right at the head of the boardroom table, clutching the glossy white binder that contained the completely mediocre decoy pitch I had left behind. She had not added a single original thought to those 50 pages. She had not bothered to research the actual market trends or familiarize herself with the core values of the target client. She was just a highly paid mannequin, hired to read my watered-down generic corporate words. She honestly believed that a bright smile and a tailored blazer were all it took to secure an enterprise-level partnership. And then there was my older sister, Amanda. My former colleague texted me that Amanda was currently standing in the far corner of the boardroom, meticulously setting up a professional digital camera on a sturdy tripod. She was eagerly acting as the unofficial family documentarian for this monumental corporate theft. Amanda wanted to securely record Brittany's supposedly triumphant moment of landing the massive tech giant so she could post a glowing self-congratulatory video on her professional networking profile by noon. She desperately wanted to showcase the brilliant new generation of Apex leadership to all of her executive connections, securing her own elite status in the human resources community while completely erasing my 8 years of grueling foundational labor. They were treating a major corporate acquisition like a family talent show. They were all standing up there in their towering glass box, patting each other on the back, completely convinced that their manipulative deception had worked perfectly. They thought I was sitting alone in my apartment, miserable, defeated, and unemployed, permanently locked out of the industry by their ridiculous and legally void non-compete clause. They truly believed they had successfully stolen my biggest client, replaced my talent with blatant nepotism, and secured their long-term financial future without paying the proper price. The arrogance required to steal another person's hard work and then celebrate that theft on camera was absolutely staggering. I picked up my phone and sent a quick reply to the junior coordinator, thanking her for the entertaining update. Then I grabbed my heavy leather briefcase, the one containing the fully executed Vanguard media pitch and the absolute destruction of Richard Harrison's company. I walked out of my apartment building with my head held high. The morning sun felt warm against my face. I hailed a black town car and gave the driver the familiar address of the Apex Communications building. The ride through the downtown streets felt incredibly peaceful. My mind was completely clear and my heart beat with a steady, rhythmic anticipation. I was not returning to that building as an underpaid, disrespected employee, and I was certainly not returning to beg for my old job back. I was arriving as the newly appointed vice president of client acquisitions for their absolute worst nightmare. I watched the towering skyscrapers pass by my window, feeling a profound sense of closure. I had given that firm my youth, my energy, and my unwavering dedication. They returned that loyalty with a 50% salary cut and a daily dose of toxic manipulation. Now, the scales of justice were about to be forcefully balanced. As the town car pulled up to the sleek glass entrance of the Apex building, I took a deep, centering breath. The game was finally over. The board was set. It was time to walk upstairs, crash their expensive little catered party, and collect my hard-earned winnings right in front of their recording cameras. I stepped out of the town car and smoothed the front of my jacket. I glanced at my reflection in the dark-tinted glass of the building's revolving doors. The woman looking back at me was fearless, fully prepared to execute a flawless professional takedown. I knew David Pierce, my new chief executive officer, was already inside the building, waiting in the lobby to make our coordinated entrance. He had arranged his schedule specifically to witness this monumental shift in power firsthand. My brother-in-law Jamal was also en route, carrying legal documents that would serve as the final nail in the coffin. I pushed through the doors and walked toward the security desk, ready to watch an empire crumble. I walked across the marble floor of the Apex Communications lobby, my heels clicking with a steady tempo. David Pierce stood near the private executive elevators, checking his watch. When he saw me approaching, a confident smile crossed his face. He held a temporary guest badge in his hand, but I shook my head, reached into my pocket, and pulled out my identification. I clipped it securely to the left lapel of my suit. The bold lettering was impossible to miss. It clearly stated my name and my title, Vice President of Client Acquisitions, Vanguard Media. David nodded in approval, understanding the psychological warfare I was about to unleash. Just as we turned toward the glass entrance, a town car pulled up to the curb outside. The man we had been waiting for stepped out. Jonathan Reed, the Chief Executive Officer of TechNexus, entered the building. He was a powerful figure who commanded immediate respect without needing to say a single word. I stepped forward to greet him, extending my hand with unwavering confidence. "Jonathan," I said warmly, "it is wonderful to see you again." He shook my hand, a smile breaking through his serious demeanor. "Rachel," he replied, his voice a low baritone. "I must admit, your call earlier this week was quite the surprise, but I am looking forward to seeing what you have prepared for us today." I gestured toward the waiting elevators, offering him a reassuring nod. I promise you, Jonathan, this presentation will be exactly what TechNexus needs to completely dominate the digital market. We stepped into the executive elevator together, the three of us forming a unified, unbreakable wall of corporate power. The doors slid shut, sealing us in a box. As the floor indicator ticked upward, my pulse quickened, but my breathing remained exceptionally steady. I had visualized this exact moment 1,000 times over the past 2 weeks. I had played out every possible reaction, every scream of outrage, and every desperate attempt at damage control that Richard would deploy. The elevator hummed smoothly, carrying us toward the 40th floor. Jonathan adjusted his cuffs, unaware of the familial and corporate warfare that was about to erupt the moment we stepped out of this car. David stood beside me, radiating the quiet confidence of a general about to watch an enemy surrender without firing a shot. The digital display flashed the number 40. A chime echoed through the small space. The doors slid open, revealing the grand reception area of Apex Communications. Through the glass walls across the lobby, the boardroom was fully visible. The scene inside was exactly as my former colleague had described. The mahogany table was overflowing with an incredible amount of catering. Brittany stood at the head of the room, clutching her white binder, looking like a deer caught in headlights. Richard was pacing near the presentation screen, nervously adjusting his tie for the 100th time. In the far corner, Amanda was hunched over her tripod, adjusting the camera lens to perfectly capture her niece. Jonathan Reed stepped out of the elevator first, his presence commanding the immediate attention of everyone on the floor. Richard saw him. The pacing stopped, replaced by an eager, almost desperate grin. Richard lunged toward the doors to welcome his supposed savior. But his movement halted. His smile froze, then melted into an expression of sheer horror. Because right behind Jonathan, matching his confident stride step for step, was me. I walked out of the elevator with my head held high, my posture radiating the kind of absolute authority that Richard had tried to suppress. The sunlight catching the metal of my Vanguard media badge acted like a flashbang in the lobby. Richard stopped in his tracks. His jaw dropped, his mouth hanging open in a gasp of pure disbelief. He stared at me, then at the badge, then back to my face, unable to process the harsh reality standing in front of him. Inside the boardroom, Brittany saw me. Her eyes widened to the size of saucers. Her hands went totally slack. The tablet she had been holding slipped from her grasp, crashing onto the hardwood floor with a sharp crack that echoed through the walls. In the corner of the room, Amanda peered around her camera setup, visibly irritated by the noise of the tablet. When her gaze landed on me walking alongside the TechNexus chief executive, the color drained from her face entirely. Her hand froze on the camera controls. She stopped recording her meticulously planned social media triumph, evaporating into thin air. The shock radiating through the quiet room was palpable, hanging in the air like thick smoke. The receptionist at the front desk stopped typing, her fingers hovering over the computer keyboard as she stared at my unexpected return. I did not pause. I did not hesitate. I walked straight past the reception desk, leading Jonathan and David toward the heavy glass doors of the boardroom. I ignored the frantic whispering that immediately broke out among the junior staff members who were witnessing this monumental collapse. I pushed the doors open and stepped inside the massive room, the distinct scent of pastries and coffee hitting me. I looked at Richard, who was still paralyzed, struggling to force his brain to accept the terrifying scenario playing out before his eyes. He tried to speak, but only a single strangled sound escaped his throat. "Good morning, Richard," I said, my voice cutting through the heavy silence like a sharp blade. "I hope you do not mind that I brought a few guests to the meeting today. I believe you already know Jonathan Reed from TechNexus. And this is David Pierce, the Chief Executive Officer of Vanguard Media." I smiled, letting the final piece of information fall from my lips. "I am here representing Vanguard as their new Vice President of Client Acquisitions, and we are ready to begin our pitch now for you." The silence that followed my introduction was so profound, it felt like the air had been vacuumed directly out of the room. Richard stared at me with unblinking, bloodshot eyes. His face transitioned from a pale, sickly white to a dangerous, mottled purple. The fragile illusion of his corporate control shattered into a million jagged pieces right in front of his most coveted client. For 10 agonizing seconds, nobody breathed. Then the explosion happened. "What the hell are you doing here?" Richard screamed. The sudden volume of his voice caused Brittany to physically jump backward, nearly knocking over a display of expensive pastries. "You do not work here anymore, Rachel. You are a disgruntled former employee trespassing on private property." He slammed his hand down on the mahogany table, sending coffee spilling over the sides of the silver carafes. He pointed a trembling finger toward the glass doors and bellowed for his assistant in the lobby. "Call security immediately. Get this woman out of my building right now." I did not move a single inch. I stood perfectly still, letting his frantic rage wash over me without leaving a mark. Jonathan Reed watched the spectacular meltdown with an expression of quiet disgust. He was a man who valued composure and strategic thinking. Seeing the chief executive officer of a major public relations firm completely lose his mind over a single former employee was everything he needed to know about the leadership of Apex Communications. David Pierce stood beside me, radiating quiet amusement as he watched his rival self-destruct. Richard realized he was losing his audience. He frantically turned his attention to Jonathan, attempting to salvage the catastrophic situation by waving his hands. "Jonathan, I apologize for this ridiculous interruption," Richard stammered, sweat visibly beading on his forehead. "This woman is completely unstable. She recently suffered a breakdown after we demoted her for poor performance. She is incredibly bitter and clearly trying to sabotage our meeting today. Please have a seat. My niece Brittany is ready to walk you through a brilliant comprehensive strategy that we have prepared exclusively for TechNexus." Jonathan did not take a seat. He crossed his arms over his chest and looked at Richard with a gaze so cold it could freeze water. "I am not interested in hearing a presentation from your niece, Richard." Jonathan replied, his baritone voice steady and unimpressed. "I came here today because Rachel invited me. She is the only person at this agency who understands my business. When she informed me that she was moving to Vanguard Media, I decided to follow her. I am here to listen to her pitch." The blood drained from Richard again. He whipped his head back toward me, his anger shifting from defensive panic into pure venomous malice. He took a threatening step forward. "You cannot pitch anything to him," Richard yelled, his voice echoing off the glass walls. "You are legally prohibited from speaking to any of my clients. You are in direct violation of an ironclad non-compete agreement. You signed it less than 2 weeks ago in this exact building. You belong to me." Amanda stepped forward from her corner, abandoning her useless camera tripod. She marched up to stand beside Richard, eager to use her authority as the Human Resources Director to crush me in front of the executives. "She is in absolute breach of contract," Amanda declared loudly, her voice trembling with misplaced righteousness. "We have her signature on file. We clearly explained the terms to her. She is banned from practicing public relations in the entire Chicago area for 2 full years." Richard seized upon Amanda, making a statement like a drowning man grabbing a life preserver. "Do you hear that, Rachel?" he shouted, pointing his finger directly at my face. "You are finished. I am going to sue you into total bankruptcy. I will tie you up in court for the next decade. I will take your house, your savings, and every dime you ever thought about earning. I will make sure you are utterly ruined. You cannot walk out and steal a $10 million account. The law is strictly on my side today." I listened to his desperate threats without breaking eye contact. He was sweating profusely now, his designer suit looking suddenly rumpled and ill-fitting. He sounded like a furious child throwing a tantrum because someone took away a toy he never truly owned. He honestly believed his piece of paper gave him absolute power over my life and career. He believed he could cut my salary, insult my worth, and then legally trap me in a state of permanent submission. He thought he possessed the ultimate weapon to destroy my future. I did not flinch. I did not argue with him or attempt to defend my actions against his delusional accusations. I simply looked down and calmly checked the precise time on my silver watch. The tiny second hand ticked away with a perfect rhythm, marking the exact end of his corporate reign. What are you doing? Richard demanded, his voice cracking with hysteria. Are you even listening to me? I am calling our lawyers right now. We are filing the injunction today. Vanguard Media cannot save you from a legally binding contract. You are going to lose absolutely everything you have ever worked for in your professional life. I lowered my wrist and offered him a polite, chilling smile that made his furious expression falter for a fleeting second. I am listening to every single word, Richard, I replied softly. I am just keeping track of our schedule because my legal counsel promised to arrive exactly at this specific moment to address your concerns. Right on cue, the heavy glass doors of the expansive boardroom swung open once again. The swift movement caught our immediate attention. The final piece of my exit strategy had arrived to deliver the fatal blow that would legally decimate his entire company once and for all. The heavy glass doors swung wide open. Stepping over the threshold was a man who possessed the kind of quiet, undeniable authority that immediately commanded the attention of every single person in the room. Jamal walked into the executive boardroom wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit and carrying a sleek black leather briefcase. As an elite employment lawyer, he was entirely accustomed to walking into hostile corporate environments and dismantling arrogant executives piece by piece. Today, he looked like an absolute predator, stepping into a cage filled with cornered mice. His expression was completely composed, showing absolutely zero emotion as he surveyed the chaotic scene. He walked with a steady, measured pace toward our side of the mahogany table. The sound of his leather dress shoes striking the hardwood floor was the only noise echoing in the paralyzed room. He did not look at the expensive catering display or the panicked faces of the junior staff watching from the hallway. His dark eyes remained fixed squarely on Richard Harrison. Standing in the far corner, Amanda practically dropped her camera. Her eyes bulged and her jaw slacked as she stared at the man she had been married to for the past 5 years. She blinked rapidly, completely unable to process the visual information her brain was receiving. Jamal? She gasped, her voice cracking into a high-pitched squeak. What are you doing here? Why are you in this building? Amanda stepped forward, reaching a hand out toward him, assuming her husband had somehow arrived to support her, or perhaps deliver an emergency message. She fully expected him to walk over and stand by her side against me. Jamal did not even glance in her direction. He completely ignored his wife, leaving her standing there with her hand outstretched in awkward, humiliating silence. He walked right past Amanda, brushing past her space without a single word of acknowledgement. He took his place firmly beside me, and David Pierce, forming an impenetrable wall of legal and corporate dominance. He set his black leather briefcase flat on the polished mahogany table right next to Richard's absurd display of French pastries. The sharp click of the briefcase latches snapping open sounded like a judge bringing down a heavy wooden gavel. Jamal reached inside the briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of formal legal documents. He squared the edges of the paper with methodical precision. When he finally spoke, his voice was a deep, resonant baritone that carried absolute finality. Richard Harrison. Jamal began staring directly into the terrified eyes of the chief executive officer. I am standing here today acting in a dual capacity. I am the official outside legal counsel representing Vanguard Media. I am also the personal attorney retained by my client, Rachel. Richard swallowed hard, taking a small, involuntary step backward. He looked wildly from Jamal to Amanda, desperate for an explanation, but Amanda was simply staring at her husband in horrified disbelief. I am here to officially notify you of pending litigation. Jamal continued, handing the top document directly across the table. When you unilaterally decided to slash my client's compensation by 50% without mutual consent, without cause, and without altering her fundamental job requirements, you made a catastrophic legal miscalculation. Under Illinois state labor law, your actions explicitly constitute a textbook case of constructive dismissal. Richard shook his head, trying to process the legal terminology. That is ridiculous, Richard stammered, pointing a shaky finger at the document. She signed an updated contract. We have her signature agreeing to the new terms. You cannot just invent a legal violation. Jamal offered a cold, terrifyingly professional smile. You forced an ultimatum that effectively rendered her continued employment financially impossible. A forced resignation disguised as a pay cut is highly illegal. By committing constructive dismissal, you committed a material breach of her original employment agreement. Therefore, you personally invalidated every single restrictive covenant contained within that document. Let me make this incredibly clear for you. Richard, Jamal stated, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous volume. Your non-compete agreement is legally void. It is completely unenforceable. It is not worth the paper you printed it on. Rachel is a free agent, and she has every legal right to work for Vanguard Media and to communicate with any corporate entity she chooses. You have absolutely no authority to restrict her professional movements or dictate her career trajectory. The color drained entirely from Richard's face as the reality of the situation crashed down on him. The ironclad trap he thought he had built was nothing more than a legal illusion. But Jamal was not finished destroying him. Furthermore, Jamal continued pulling a second stack of documents from his briefcase and slamming them onto the table. We are formally filing a massive lawsuit against you and Apex Communications for wage theft. You deliberately withheld properly earned compensation under coercion. We are also pursuing extensive damages for creating a hostile workplace environment and engaging in retaliatory corporate practices. We have meticulously documented evidence of your attempts to extort my client through the Human Resources Department. Amanda gasped, clutching her chest as she realized her own husband had just implicated her directly in a massive corporate lawsuit. Jamal finally turned his head to look at his wife. The expression in his eyes was completely devoid of marital affection. It was the look of a prosecutor examining a guilty defendant. You thought you could manipulate the law to exploit a dedicated employee, Jamal said, directing his words to both Richard and Amanda. You thought you could steal her salary to fund your own nepotism without facing any consequences. You were wrong. You are about to face the full, devastating weight of the Illinois judicial system, and I am going to personally ensure that this agency pays every single penalty the law allows. You tried to ruin her career. Now you will spend the next 5 years desperately trying to save your own from total bankruptcy forever. The heavy silence that settled over the boardroom was absolute. Jamal stood tall and unyielding, leaving Richard utterly decimated. Jonathan Reed had watched this entire pathetic display of corporate incompetence and familial betrayal without moving a single muscle. He was a man who built his technology empire by identifying strong leadership and eliminating dead weight. What he had just witnessed was the complete opposite of leadership. Richard turned his desperate, pleading eyes back to Jonathan, attempting a final, pathetic salvage operation. He stepped around the table, kicking aside the tablet Brittany had dropped. "Jonathan, please." Richard begged, his voice a hollow rasp. "This is just an internal personnel issue. It has absolutely nothing to do with our capabilities as an agency. Brittany is fully prepared to walk you through our dynamic new strategy right now. We can offer you a substantial discount on your retainer for the first year to make up for this unfortunate interruption. Just give us 10 minutes to clear the room, and we will prove our immense value to TechNexus." Jonathan slowly uncrossed his arms. He looked at Richard with an expression of profound disgust. "You do not have any value to offer me, Richard," Jonathan stated, his baritone voice filling the room with crushing authority. "I have been sitting here watching you throw a tantrum because your best employee finally stood up to your rampant exploitation. You brought me into a room filled with expensive pastries and a terrified young woman who clearly does not know the first thing about my company. You thought you could blind me with catering and nepotism. You honestly believed I would hand a $10 million account to an agency that cannot even manage its own internal payroll without committing a felony." Richard opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He was completely out of ammunition. Jonathan turned his gaze away from the ruined chief executive officer and looked directly at me. His stern expression softened into one of absolute professional respect. "I do business with the brains of the operation, not the parasites," Jonathan said, loudly ensuring every single person in the room heard the distinction clearly. "Rachel, you told me you were moving to Vanguard Media because of irreconcilable differences with your former management. Seeing this disaster firsthand, I am honestly amazed you stayed here as long as you did." I stepped forward, approaching the mahogany table. I unlatched my heavy leather briefcase and pulled out the sleek black folder containing the comprehensive Vanguard Media proposal. I placed it right on top of the glossy white binder that held the useless decoy pitch Richard had forced me to write. "I believe we have a finalized agreement to execute," Jonathan Revenge said, my voice ringing with calm confidence. David Pierce stepped up beside me, producing a heavy fountain pen from his breast pocket. He handed the pen to Jonathan, offering a polite nod. "Vanguard Media is ready to formally welcome TechNexus to our portfolio," David added smoothly. "We guarantee that your account will be handled with the highest level of strategic expertise and absolute legal integrity." Jonathan took the fountain pen. He did not ask to move to a different room. He did not suggest taking the documents back to his own office for review. He stepped right up to the massive mahogany boardroom table, pushing aside a silver tray of imported fruit to make room. He opened the black folder, exposing the finalized $10 million exclusivity contract. Richard watched in paralyzed horror. His feet were seemingly glued to the hardwood floor. He was physically incapable of stopping the nightmare unfolding right in front of his eyes. Brittany was openly sobbing now, her pink blazer looking ridiculous amidst the heavy corporate execution taking place. Amanda was leaning against the far wall, hyperventilating as she realized her own husband had just orchestrated the complete destruction of her career. Jonathan leaned over the table and pressed the tip of the fountain pen against the thick paper. The scratching sound of his signature echoed loudly in the silent room. He signed the first page, flipped to the second, and signed again. With every stroke of the pen, Richard lost another piece of his crumbling empire. Jonathan dated the final page and closed the folder firmly. He handed the executed contract to me. I took the document, feeling the incredible weight of my hard-earned victory. I placed it securely back into my leather briefcase and fastened the latches. I looked at Richard. His shoulders were slumped, his face a mask of total devastation. He had tried to force me to accept 50% of my value. In return, I had just taken 100% of his future. "It was a pleasure doing business with you, Richard," I said, my tone perfectly polite and utterly merciless. Jamal adjusted his suit jacket and picked up his legal briefcase. "You will receive the formal lawsuit filings at this office by Monday morning," Jamal informed Richard and Amanda. "I strongly suggest you retain highly competent defense counsel immediately. You are going to need it." I turned my back on my former boss and my toxic sister. David, Jonathan, Jamal, and I walked toward the glass doors, moving as a unified, impenetrable force. We stepped out of the boardroom and walked across the reception area, heading straight for the executive elevators. The junior staff members were all standing at their desks, watching us leave with wide, astonished eyes. We stepped inside the elevator. Before the doors closed, the heavy silence broke. The sound of Richard's screaming erupted from the boardroom. It was a raw, furious roar of a man who had lost absolutely everything. We heard the distinct sound of glass shattering as he violently swept the catering display off the mahogany table. He began screaming at Brittany, calling her useless and blaming her for the massive failure. We all just smiled. The fallout from the boardroom explosion was swift and absolutely merciless. By Monday morning, the news of TechNexus signing an exclusive multi-year agreement with Vanguard Media hit the industry trade publications. The articles highlighted my direct transition, painting a glaring picture of Apex Communications losing their top-performing executive and their biggest prospective client in a single devastating blow. The public relations disaster was immediate. Apex was a publicly traded company, and the market reaction was brutal. Their stock plummeted by 22% before the closing bell on Tuesday. Panic swept through their shareholders, causing a massive sell-off that erased millions in company valuation. Richard Harrison, realizing his entire empire was on the verge of total collapse, scrambled to find a scapegoat. He could not admit to the board of directors that his own arrogant nepotism and illegal wage theft had caused the crisis. Instead, he did exactly what cowards do when backed into a corner. He sacrificed his loyal followers to save his own skin. On Wednesday morning, Richard officially terminated Brittany. He publicly blamed her for the disastrous client interactions that had alienated their core accounts over the previous week, throwing his own niece directly under the corporate bus. He did not stop there. He immediately turned his wrath on the Human Resources Department. He fired Amanda, claiming she had grossly mismanaged executive compensation packages and exposed the company to severe legal liability. He escorted his own niece and my sister out of the building, using the very security guards he had threatened to use on me. He denied them both any severance packages, citing gross negligence and breach of fiduciary duty. The moment Amanda lost her coveted corporate title, my personal phone turned into a battlefield. My parents, who had spent my entire life belittling my achievements, suddenly remembered they had a second daughter. The voicemails piled up one after another, shifting rapidly from aggressive demands to pathetic pleading. My mother left a tearful message begging me to drop the pending lawsuit. She claimed Amanda was suffering and that I needed to show some basic family loyalty to help her survive this ordeal. She actually expected me to withdraw a massive federal wage theft case, just so her favorite child could beg for her human resources job back. My father left a voicemail trying to use his stern paternal voice, commanding me to fix the mess I had created. He told me that family protects family, and that my actions were tearing everyone apart. I sat in my new corner office at Vanguard Media, listening to their desperate manipulation tactics. They were not apologizing for stealing my salary. They were not expressing any remorse for treating me like disposable trash for over a decade. They were only upset because the golden child was finally experiencing the harsh consequences of her own malicious actions. I did not return a single call. I did not text them back to argue my point. I simply opened my contacts, selected my mother, my father, and Amanda, and hit the block button on every single number. I severed the digital cord without a flinch. I owed absolutely nothing to people who only valued me when they needed a stepping stone to elevate themselves. While I was establishing my absolute professional boundaries, Jamal was executing his own meticulous exit strategy. He had endured years of Amanda prioritizing her parents' approval over their own marriage. He had watched her transform into a toxic mirror image of Richard Harrison. But Jamal was a brilliant attorney, and he never made a move without building an airtight case first. On Thursday evening, he formally served Amanda with divorce papers. The shock of losing her job was instantly compounded by the total collapse of her marriage. But Jamal did not just file for a standard separation based on irreconcilable differences. He filed with a mountain of irrefutable financial evidence that guaranteed his victory. During his meticulous review of their household finances, Jamal had uncovered a massive trail of deceit. For the past 3 years, Amanda had been secretly embezzling thousands of dollars from their joint savings accounts. She was funneling the money to purchase designer bags, luxury car leases, and expensive country club memberships. She was desperately funding an extravagant lifestyle purely to impress our status-obsessed parents and maintain her facade as the wildly successful golden child. She had stolen from her own husband and her own child to buy the adoration of people who only loved her for her apparent wealth. Jamal presented the embezzlement evidence to the judge during the emergency custody hearing. He demonstrated that Amanda was financially unstable, legally compromised by her recent termination for gross negligence, and entirely unfit to provide a secure environment for their 4-year-old son, Leo. The judge agreed completely with his assessment. Jamal was granted full primary custody of Leo, with Amanda reduced to heavily supervised visitation rights. In less than a week, my sister lost her high-paying job, her corporate reputation, her husband, her child, and her luxurious lifestyle. She was left with absolutely nothing but the hollow approval of our parents, who were now forced to support a disgraced unemployed daughter. The karma was absolute and blindingly precise. They had tried to trap me in a corner to fund their unearned privilege. Instead, they had inadvertently handed me the keys to my own kingdom while simultaneously locking themselves inside a burning building. The empire they tried to steal was thriving in my hands, while the one they fought so dirty to protect was reduced to absolute ashes. My victory was entirely complete. I had won everything by simply knowing my own true value. They assumed my silence was a sign of weakness, but it was actually the quiet construction of their absolute ruin. The consequences they faced were a direct reflection of their own immense greed. I felt absolutely no guilt watching their entirely toxic foundation crumble into dust forever. 6 months have passed since the day I walked out of that glass boardroom and left the burning ruins of Apex Communications behind me. I am currently standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my spacious corner office at Vanguard Media. The winter frost has melted away, replaced by the vibrant golden warmth of a beautiful Chicago summer. I hold a cup of freshly brewed coffee, watching the bustling city streets far below. The skyline stretches out endlessly, a sprawling landscape of towering architecture and boundless opportunity. This view does not just represent my professional success. It represents my absolute freedom. The aftermath of that fateful Friday morning played out exactly as Jamal and I had predicted, though the speed of the collapse was entirely unprecedented. Without the stabilizing anchor of the TechNexus contract, and with the sudden glaring exposure of their incredibly toxic leadership, Apex Communications suffered a fatal corporate hemorrhage. They lost 4 more major enterprise clients within a single month. The board of directors ousted Richard Harrison in a desperate, ultimately futile attempt to salvage the sinking ship. But the damage was already done. 2 weeks ago, Apex Communications officially filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The company Richard built on a foundation of stolen credit, blatant nepotism, and illegal wage exploitation has been reduced to a cautionary tale whispered in the financial district. The personal consequences for my former family were equally severe. After being publicly fired for gross negligence and losing her lucrative human resources salary, Amanda found herself entirely destitute. Her massive embezzlement was completely exposed during the divorce proceedings. The court froze her remaining assets, and Jamal was awarded full permanent custody of their young son, Leo. Stripped of her corporate title, her marriage, and her extravagant lifestyle, Amanda was forced to pack up her few remaining belongings and move directly into our parents' basement. The very people who had constantly praised her as the ultimate golden child are now financially burdened with supporting an unemployed, disgraced daughter who alienated her only real allies. My parents tried calling me from different burner phones a few times after the bankruptcy news broke, likely hoping I would feel a sudden surge of misplaced familial obligation. I never answered a single call. I simply blocked every new number they dialed from. The silence that followed has been the most luxurious sound I have ever experienced. Jamal and I, on the other hand, share a deep, unwavering bond forged in the fires of mutual respect and strategic brilliance. We meet for lunch every other Wednesday. He is thriving at his law firm, raising Leo in a calm, nurturing environment, completely free from the suffocating manipulation of my parents. Jamal was the undisputed most valuable player in my escape plan. He saw the exact legal loophole Richard blindly opened, and he empowered me to walk through it. I will forever be profoundly grateful for his razor-sharp intellect and his unyielding alliance. He proved that true family is not determined by shared genetics. True family is defined by the people who stand fiercely beside you when the rest of the world tries to tear you down. Here at Vanguard Media, I have found my chosen professional family. David Pierce is a chief executive officer who actually understands the fundamental concept of mutual investment. He does not view his employees as disposable tools to be squeezed for every last drop of profit. He views us as essential partners. He honors my strategic vision, he celebrates my victories, and he compensates me exactly for the immense value I bring to the organization. We recently closed two more multi-million-dollar accounts, expanding our dominance in the Midwest market. I am leading a team of brilliant, driven professionals who operate in a culture of absolute transparency and relentless innovation. I am no longer spending my nights chained to a desk, desperately trying to keep a failing agency afloat. I work my scheduled hours, I deliver exceptional results, and I go home to enjoy a peaceful, abundant life. Looking back at that performance review, I realize Richard Harrison handed me the greatest gift I could have ever received. He thought he was putting me in my place. He thought he was teaching me a lesson about corporate submission. Instead, he forced me to finally quantify my own worth. For 8 long years, I had allowed my family and my boss to convince me that I should simply be grateful to be in the room. I accepted their subtle insults, their constant demands, and their complete lack of appreciation because I believed that relentless loyalty would eventually be rewarded. I was wrong. Unbound loyalty to toxic people only invites further exploitation. They will push you, use you, and drain you until there is absolutely nothing left, and then they will blame you for being empty. When Richard slid that contract across the mahogany desk and demanded I accept a 50% pay cut, he shattered the illusion I had been living under. He showed me that my sacrifices meant absolutely nothing to him. He showed me that the people I called family would applaud my downfall if it meant elevating their own social status. That sudden, brutal clarity was painful, but it was also incredibly liberating. It gave me the absolute permission I needed to stop fighting for a seat at their dysfunctional table and start building my own empire instead. I take a sip of coffee, turning from the breathtaking view and walking toward my sleek glass desk. My monitor glows with details of my next strategy. I feel a profound sense of peace. I survived the betrayal, executed a flawless exit, and claimed the victory I deserved. My journey to an independent executive taught me the most vital lesson a professional woman can learn. Never let anyone dictate your worth by cutting you in half. If they try to lower your value, let them pay the full price of your absence. The story of Rachel's triumphant exit from Apex Communications serves as a powerful reminder of a fundamental truth that many dedicated professionals often overlook. True loyalty should never be blind, and it must absolutely never come at the expense of your own dignity. Throughout her career, Rachel mistakenly believed that her relentless hard work, long hours, and impressive results would naturally secure her the respect and financial compensation she deserved. Instead, her toxic employer and manipulative family saw her dedication as a massive vulnerability to exploit. They assumed she was so deeply conditioned to accept less that she would quietly endure a devastating 50% salary cut just to maintain the familiar status quo. The most vital lesson we can extract from this narrative is that you cannot wait for someone else to recognize your value. You must firmly establish it yourself. When you consistently overdeliver while accepting underappreciation, you unintentionally teach toxic leaders that your boundaries are negotiable. Rachel's profound transformation occurred the exact moment she stopped relying on her corrupt boss and gaslighting sister to validate her worth. By fully understanding modern labor laws and secretly securing a position that honored her true market value, she strategically reclaimed her power. She proved that the most devastating response to blatant disrespect is not an emotional breakdown, but a calculated, flawless departure. We all hold the power to redefine our personal and professional narratives when we refuse to settle for the unfair discounts others try to force upon us. It requires immense courage to walk away from toxic familiarity, but the freedom waiting on the other side is undeniably worth the leap. If you are currently feeling undervalued in your workplace or your personal relationships, take that crucial first step toward firmly demanding exactly what you truly deserve starting today.